Hello, and welcome to our two-part webinar series on perfectionism and procrastination. Today, we're covering part two, understanding and managing procrastination in veterinary medicine. So if you joined us for part one, welcome back for part two. If you're just joining us for part two, welcome. I'm going to be uh, your host, the presentation leader, the webinar leader for this session. I'm Dr. Dustin Kieschnick. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a VMHS facilitator. Um, before we jump in, I want to mention that this webinar is generously sponsored by Not One More Vet, NOMV. Um, it allows us the opportunity to provide this content and hopefully help those in the veterinary profession. Now, a little bit more about me. Um, I've been a VMHS facilitator, veterinary mental health support facilitator for over 5 years. I also serve as an assistant clinical professor at UCSF, the University of California, San Francisco. And before that, I spent 9 years in the US Marine Corps, and I'm a US Marine Corps veteran. So let's jump right in, which is the opposite of what we tend to do when we procrastinate. Procrastination is the tendency to avoid unpleasant or stressful tasks that are often important and replace them with less important, less stressful activity. So there's a famous writer that uh, that said one time, if I want to make sure I do something on my to-do list, I put it second, right? Because the first one is usually the most important, and therefore it's going to be the one we tend to avoid. Now, the word procrastination itself comes from the Latin. Uh, the original term is procrastinus, which means for tomorrow, right? Which is fitting because it says whatever I can't do today, I can put off until tomorrow. So, what causes procrastination? Now, we have to put the caveat that everyone procrastinates from time to time. Everyone. And one of the greatest misconceptions about procrastinators is that they have poor time management skills or that they're unmotivated. And while this may sometimes be the case, there are often deeper psychological factors involved. And most often, it's completely unrelated to time management and the ability to manage time effectively. So, some other causes of procrastination are low self esteem. So, individuals who doubt their ability to satisfactorily complete a task may be more likely to avoid or delay starting on it. Another is depression. Interestingly, approximately 25% of male and 37% of female veterinarians in the United States have at least experienced one episode of depression since graduation from vet school. Uh, Depression symptoms include persistent feelings of worthlessness, indecisiveness, and guilt. Now, this is not just relegated to the US. Similar statistics have been documented in the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. So, while this study didn't account for the prevalence of depression symptoms amongst veterinary medicine support staff, the researchers hypothesized that they would be similar given the shared challenges. Now, another another cause of procrastination is burnout. And there was a write up in the National Association of Veterinary Technicians in America, 2016 journal article on compassion fatigue or burnout that seemed especially fitting. And so I'll read it to you. It often feels like the world is on our shoulders. No time to rest, eat, or use the bathroom. Constantly ringing phones. very ill pets, very upset and high-strung owners, and what seems like little appreciation and support from owners, coworkers, family members, and friends. We have often had to cancel plans in our personal life to take care of a sick animal, thus leading to resentment of those things we once cared for so highly: animals, their well-being, their family, and this field. The lines of work-life balance are often blurred, and the stress from the workday, work week, work month, or even work year is taken home with us. Busy, stressful days can lead to bad eating and sleeping habits, thus leaving staff feeling overtired, overworked, and underappreciated. I want you to maybe take a minute to just digest that, take that in. It's incredibly powerful. And in my experience working with the veterinary community, so true, right? There's often very, very little room for anything else. And when that happens, burnout can almost become an inevitability. Now, some other causes of procrastination: anxiety, which is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. Now, factors in our perceived ability to respond and manage this event or outcome. So it affects our ability to navigate events because it gives us a different set of decision options, right? And as a result, we may attempt to avoid situations that trigger or worsen symptoms. Those who experience anxiety at work may become preoccupied with their job performance and then by a fear of failure, right? This lack of confidence and ability to complete a task can lead to procrastination just in order to avoid failure in the short term. So this is this is really the crux of procrastination. It says I can avoid failure if I just don't do it now, right? I can prolong it. And it implies that failure is inevitable if we do something in our current state. But that's the thing that we're gonna give you strategies to try and challenge, and I'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation. So, other causes of procrastination, especially relative to the veterinary community, is that veterinary medicine professionals are often intelligent, cerebral, empathetic, and compassionate. But as a result of that, they place incredibly high standards on themselves. And this tendency, combined with the intensity of the job, community expectations, and the life and death stakes of operations, can lead veterinary medicine professionals to be more susceptible to suffering from anxiety, right? And the more anxiety, the more pressure, the more depression symptoms there are, the more burnout there is. It saps our energy. It leaves us with fatigue. And when we're in a fatigued state, it's so much harder for us to embark on tasks, even if they're important. It gives us almost um, this it gives us a heavy, heavy incentive to procrastinate. Now, if I go back to the veterinary medicine professionals and just how much pressure is placed on you, we look at pressure and we look at, I mean, you can replace pressure with anxiety in this 2x2 graph too. But as you know, as if we put performance on the y-axis and pressure on the x-axis, what this graph really tells us is that there's a sweet spot for the right amount of pressure and peak performance, right? If there's very, very little pressure, it leads to less performance. If there's too much pressure, it leads to anxiety, right? And so when we think about this, we're always trying to stay in that sweet spot, being cognizant of when it is on, you know, the either end of the spectrum, whether it's boredom or anxiety. It's too little pressure or too much pressure. Now, procrastination is also closely linked to present environment and resulting mood states. And I will say, I think this is one of the bigger contributors to procrastination. So people may procrastinate when stressed or overwhelmed because we hope that our future self will be better equipped to tackle a certain task, right? Let's think about that. It says, you know, you know what? I don't know if I have the energy for it today. Maybe I'll be in a better place tomorrow. And the the difficulty with that is that there's no guarantee that our future self is going to be any better than our current self. There's no guarantee that our future self is going to have more energy than our current self. Now, as a result, those prone to procrastination may find help with emotion regulation and stress management to be much more valuable than skills training for time management because our emotions and our mood states in the moment can be so much more powerful because when we're faced with the situation of whether procrastinate or not, we're really drawing on what resources do we have to be able to complete this task, to be able to approach this project at this point in time. Now, procrastination may manifest partly from an inability to cope with difficult emotions in the moment, right? If we feel overwhelmed with emotion, there's no way we can think about completing a task in that moment. So if we think about the fear of being unable to deal with emergencies or a complicated scenario, those tend to be the most prone to procrastination because the perceived effort or the perceived resources that we're going to need to tackle those is much higher. And if we're not in a place emotionally in that moment, it might be really hard to not procrastinate. So when we think about emotion regulation, maybe I'll take a step back and define it first and say that emotional regulation is the ability to identify and modulate emotional responses to effectively navigate the demands of a pressing situation and life in general, right? And so this is why effective coping skills or emotion regulation skills are so important, especially during stressful, high paced, and vulnerable work situations when our capacity to regulate our thoughts and feelings is most likely to be compromised, right? When we're in high high paced, vulnerable work situations, we often don't have time for much else, right? And that can really be when our regulation abilities feel most inadequate. Now, some strategies for effective emotion regulation are first off to name it. In order to be emotionally intelligent, we have to be emotionally literate. We have to be able to know what our emotions are and be able to describe them. And so this graph here is from the atlasofemotions.org, and it shows a scale from the least intense version of an emotion, in this case, sadness, to the most intense. And so it goes from disappointment to anguish, discouragement to sorrow. And so this can be helpful to really be specific with the emotion that we're feeling because using these words can help us then pinpoint it to an intensity level that we can then use an appropriate strategy to regulate. Now, for some folks, the using descriptors or using words to signify the intensity doesn't always work. And so another technique or another tactic is to use a scale from 0 to 10 or 0 to 100. I'll use zero to 10 for this example and say, you know, right now I'm feeling sadness and the intensity is like a 7. And having sort of developing your own sense or your own scale for what 0 is, what a 10 is, what a 5 is compared to a 4, you know, everything you do or every effort you put into to this emotional literacy will undoubtedly be beneficial to be able to regulate the emotions a little bit more effectively. Now, when when dealing with procrastination, it's crucial to address the primary cause of the behavior. And often the primary cause, in addition to maybe emotions, are thoughts. So we have emotions on one side, thoughts on one side. They both can converge to influence our behavior, right? Anybody who's seen a CBT triangle and say emotions influence thoughts, which influence behaviors, and vice versa. So that means we have to be able to name our thoughts, to identify them. And once we identify them, it allows us to challenge them. Because certain cognitive distortions, such as fear of letting others down, imposter syndrome, fear of failure, are likely to cause procrastination, right? These are reversive things. So if we feel this averse in the moment, we're much more likely to procrastinate. So, but frequently the thoughts that cause us the greatest suffering in life are either untrue or not entirely accurate. So this fear of failure, letting others down, right? When we identify these cognitive distortions, when we identify these problematic thoughts or these unhelpful thoughts, it gives us an opportunity to challenge them and say, okay, you know what, that may not actually be quite true. Or, I don't know that that's entirely accurate, right? Because if we don't challenge them, the thoughts they tend to become automatic over time. And we in essence stop questioning them and just accept them as fact. So if we have a thought that we're going to fail, then we just accept it. Like, okay, it's inevitable. But if we challenge it, we can draw on, let's say, let's say I if I've used an example of I'm going into a procedure and I feel like I'm going to make a mistake and it's going to result in a bad outcome for the patient, right? If we challenge that thought, we can say, "Oh, wait, I've done this procedure a lot of times before. I can draw on that knowledge. I have this experience, right? I feel like I have a good sense for what's happening. I've seen this patient a few times. I'm very familiar with them, right? We start to combat that fear of failure. We start to chip away at it and say, like, oh, you know what? Actually, we could have a really good outcome here. Like that's one of the possibilities. And actually, the experience that I have and everything I know about this case actually indicates that more than failure. So we we give ourselves an opportunity then to say, like, okay, well, you know what? I'm not going to cancel this and put it off till tomorrow. Let's just go in and do it. We got this. Challenging your thoughts enables you to say, you know what? I got this. I don't need to procrastinate. Something that's often overlooked is attending to our physiology. So making sure we get enough sleep, making sure we're hydrated, making sure we eat enough, making sure that we get enough exercise that allows us to feel healthy. watching our sugar, our caffeine, our alcohol intake, and our spending, which can be a distraction, which can be an avoidance strategy to not have to deal with what's happening internally. Being mindful of screen time and social media, when we start to doom scroll, also to just escape what we're feeling and just avoid, right? There's so much of procrastination that can be linked to screen time and doom scrolling. But what attending to your physiology also does is that it allows us to feel like we have the resources. It allows us to feel like we have the energy to tackle a task, to tackle a project, to take on something that we might normally procrastinate if we didn't feel like we have enough energy. Right? So it can be super important, like this way of making sure that we're taking care of ourselves on a daily basis. Right. So some strategies for overcoming procrastination: reframing it. Whenever fear strikes, try to reframe it. It goes back to what I the slide before when I talked about the procedure and the fear of failure. Right. Part of what we're doing in identifying and challenging the thoughts is we're reframing them. We're saying, you know what, I do have what it takes to do this. You know what, I got good sleep. I feel as ready as I'll ever be. And so instead of picturing all the bad things that could happen, think of something positive that might transpire. Or even better, picture the best possible outcome and consistently remind yourself. This next one, this is my personal favorite. When you feel like procrastinating, use the 5 minute rule. So you're only committing to working on a task that you don't want to do or that you would normally procrastinate. Just do it for 5 minutes, right? What this does is it makes the task approachable. It makes it feel manageable. It makes it feel accomplishable in any emotional state. You can do anything, almost anything, for 5 minutes, right? And what often happens is that once you start, you generally will continue, right? It's almost like this warm up phase that gets you started. And once you're started, like, oh, this wasn't so bad, right? And it also gives you permission to say, like, if indeed you work for 5 minutes and you're like, I really don't have it today. I don't know that I can do this today. At least you've done 5 minutes, right? And you checked in with yourself, and then your body is saying, like, you know what? I actually can't do this today. Okay, you've tested it. You're not assuming that you won't have enough energy. You're testing that hypothesis, and sometimes, okay, you know what? I do have the energy. And sometimes, you know what? I don't. And that's the beauty of the 5 minute rule, is that it allows us to do that. It allows us to approach. And most of the time, it allows us to complete a task that we probably wouldn't have done otherwise. Oh, another thing we can do is ask, what are your fears trying to tell you about yourself? If you're oriented towards failure, the fear of failure, what does it say about your level of self-confidence? About how much you trust yourself? So ask your heart, ask your intuition, ask God or a higher power or the universe or whatever you feel comfortable with. Can you learn anything from asking while refusing to let go in, and get in the way of who you want to be, right? Can you allow yourself to ask questions of yourself and confront the fears that come up? Who are you? Another thing is to be authentic. Like, what would it look like to put the person you wanted to be out into the world? Right? That person that you've always imagined, that confident person, that person that loves themselves, that person that has the courage to really just take on the task, that person that has the energy to take on the task. What could you do? Like, who all could you help if you were that person? Be that person. Imagine it. Now, we also, this goes back to talking about a little bit about the physiology, in that if we use these micro habits of taking care of ourselves, attending to our physiology, managing our emotions, regulating our emotions, right? Over the course of a normal day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., we might feel an intensity level of alert to terror because we have nothing to really help keep us regulated there. But if we use our micro habits, that could be taking a break. It could be using the 5 minute rule. It could be like identifying your emotions and responding to them appropriately. It could be challenging thoughts. Using these little micro habits allows us over the course of the day to maintain a consistent intensity that allows us to really be the most effective for the longest period of time. So finally, and understandably, many of us try to cope with procrastination by avoiding situations that might elicit this response. Avoidance, however, prevents us from growth, which over time leads us to becoming disengaged and numb. And furthermore, when we're in situations where we encounter what we fear, we may feel a panicked urge to flee, or we may feel paralyzed. This is when avoidance becomes the strategy. And then our first instinct is like, well, this is uncomfortable. We panic. Let's run. This avoidance leads to avoidance tends to generalize into both our professional and personal lives. They tend to bleed together until we're really living a half-hearted, unfulfilling existence. Avoidance puts us in this bubble. It puts us in this bunker, and it doesn't allow us to experience the totality of the world. And that's what procrastination is. It's avoiding the thing in the moment based on how we feel in that moment. So forgive and trust yourself. Research shows that individuals who forgave themselves for procrastinating in the past had lower chances of procrastinating in the future. This forgiveness often comes hand in hand with trusting oneself, trusting the ways you're equipped to complete a task, your experience, your clinical skills, your training, and your passion can prompt confident engagement. So forgive and trust. So thank you so much for attending this part two on procrastination. We covered some of the causes, some of the ways that procrastination looks, what it means, the definition, and we also covered some strategies that hopefully will help you in battling and confronting anxiety, like emotion regulation, and my my personal favorite, the 5 minute rule. Now, we encourage you to please visit NOMV's website to learn more. NOMV curates a variety of resources for support staff that can be found on our site at NOMV Resources. There are informative webinars that may be found at Not One More Vet's YouTube. And additionally, NAVI's Lifeboat program provides anonymous peer support for veterinary professionals, and Clear Blueprint is a program for workplace well-being. Also, Navi's List is a database of peer-submitted resources, and we also offer support grants for individuals and emergency grants for clinics. Now, please do not hesitate to let me know if you have any questions. Please reach out to vmhs@navi.org. So next, also wanted to cover the references that were involved with the creation of this content, which allowed us to bring the information to you in this webinar. And so I'll flip through these slides. I'll pause for a few seconds to allow you to capture them if that's something that you would like to do. want to say thank you again for attending part two of our series on perfectionism and procrastination. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you found this incredibly helpful, or that hope that there's some takeaways that you can have that will help you in your work, in your career. Thank you so much.